Hello, Dolphins fans. Things are pretty heated behind the scenes at the Miami Dolphins, and I need to address a few important points with you. Let's also talk about Liam Eichenberg and Tua Tagovailoa. I've noticed a pattern in how the contracts were structured, and I'm going to give you all the details about what this means for the team, the front office, and the future of some players. Before we start, make sure you've already hit the like button, but only do so if you're a true Miami Dolphins fan. If possible, write something like this: Go Dolphins! My heart bleeds green and orange. First, let's talk about Liam Eichenberg's contract. His deal is structured as a one-year, $2.2 million contract, which on the surface might seem like a standard depth move. But the reality is that this contract all but guarantees he'll be on the roster next season unless the team finds a way to trade him after June 1st. The problem? Finding a trade partner will be extremely difficult. Now, here's where things get really worrisome. If Eichenberg is on the roster, there's a very real possibility he could start at left guard in week 1. And let's be honest, that's not what Dolphins fans want to hear. Based on his contract ranking, he ranks 19th out of 66 at center, 29th highest at left guard, and 23rd highest at right guard. Those aren't numbers that scream player who should start, but here we are. Last season, Eichenberg was rotated in and out of the lineup, even splitting snaps with Isaiah Wynn when Wynn was healthy. So, the concern is real. Does this mean Miami actually views him as a legitimate starter? If they did, it would explain why they structured his deal the way they did. But if they don't, then why bring him back at all? The only logical explanation is that they see him as insurance, but the financial commitment suggests they are preparing to use him. Now, moving on to free agency as a whole, there's a theme with the contracts Miami has been handing out. Every single deal outside of a few key players has been structured with very little guaranteed money beyond 2025. James Daniels, Terrell Dodson, and Nick Westbrook, for example, all signed short-term deals with minimal financial commitments past this season. Even Daniels' 3-year contract doesn't carry any dead cap in 2026, meaning the team can move on if things don't work out. That's a clear indication that the Dolphins are being extremely cautious about long-term commitments. But why? One theory is that owner Stephen Ross has put financial restrictions in place, essentially telling general manager Chris Grier and head coach Mike McDaniel that they need to stay within a strict budget. Maybe Ross still believes in this regime, but he's making it clear that they can't go overboard. Another explanation? The uncertainty surrounding the team's leadership. No future in these contracts means the team isn't tying itself down to the current decision makers. This includes McDaniel, Grier, and even Tagovailoa. By now, we would expect Grier to make a trademark move, trading a mid-round pick for a young, talented player to develop. But so far, nothing. Does that suggest he's holding back because he isn't sure if he'll be around to see the plan through? Maybe. Then there's Tua. His contract has not been touched, despite the fact that restructuring it could free up an additional $19 million in cap space. That's a huge number, and yet the Dolphins are choosing to carry his full cap hit of $39.564 million into 2024. The message here? The front office is playing it safe. If they wanted to commit to Tua long-term, they would have extended him by now. Instead, they've left the door open to move on after this season. A trade after June 1st would save them $43 million in cap space, which is massive. Of course, this doesn't mean the Dolphins are actively looking to move on from Tua, but it does mean they're keeping their options open. If he has a great year and leads Miami to a deep playoff run, then sure, he'll get his extension. But if he struggles, the team has given itself a clear exit strategy. Another interesting sign? The team hasn't restructured the contracts of Tyreek Hill or Jalen Ramsey either. Usually, when teams expect to keep a player long-term, they restructure their deals to create immediate cap relief while pushing money into future seasons. The fact that Miami hasn't done this with their top players suggests they're keeping future flexibility intact. At the same time, there are a few names that could get extensions soon. Players like Zach Sealer, Connor Williams, and Robert Hunt could be prime candidates for new deals. These are players who fit Miami's long-term vision and have proven their value. Extending them would make sense, both from a financial and roster-building standpoint. So, what does all of this mean for the 2024 season? Well, it tells us that Miami is going all in on the current roster, but with an exit plan in place if things don't work out. The team is structured to make one more push with this core, but if they fail to get over the hump, big changes could be coming. And that leads us to the ultimate question: what happens if the Dolphins start the season slow? If they come out and struggle, will Ross make a mid-season coaching change? Could Grier be on the hot seat? There were already rumors this past offseason that Grier might not get fired, but rather promoted to a different role within the organization. If that happens, it would signal a new direction for the franchise. For now, the message is clear. This is a make or break year. The contracts, the lack of long-term commitments, the hesitancy to restructure deals, all of it points to a team that's leaving its future wide open. But now, I want to hear from you. What do you think of the Dolphins' approach this offseason? Are you worried about Eichenberg starting? Do you think the front office is playing it too safe? And most importantly, do you believe Tua is the long-term answer at quarterback? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's take this conversation even deeper because there are a few angles we haven't fully explored yet, and they could have a huge impact on the Miami Dolphins 2024 season. One of the biggest takeaways from everything we've discussed is that this roster, as talented as it is, doesn't have a long-term safety net. The Dolphins are built for the present, but the future is completely uncertain. And that raises the question, what happens if things don't go according to plan? Let's start with Mike McDaniel. If this team starts 2-6 again like last year, do we really believe Stephen Ross is just going to sit back and watch? The reality is, Ross has a history of being aggressive when things aren't going well. We've seen it time and time again. He went after Jim Harbaugh when Tony Sparano was still the head coach. He was heavily involved in the pursuit of Deshaun Watson. And just last year, there were rumors about Ross being interested in Jim Harbaugh again before Harbaugh took the Chargers' job. So, if the Dolphins stumble out of the gate, it wouldn't be shocking if Ross steps in and makes a move. But then, what happens with Chris Grier? If McDaniel gets fired, does Grier survive? Or do they completely clean house? That's where things get tricky because, despite the criticism, Grier has been in this organization for over 20 years. And even if he does get fired, there have been rumblings that Ross might just move him into another role within the front office. Now, let's talk about Tua again because this situation is just as uncertain as the coaching staff. The decision not to touch his contract speaks volumes. If the Dolphins were fully committed to him long-term, they would have already restructured his deal or given him an extension. But they haven't. Instead, they're keeping all their options open, which tells us that Tua is still playing for his future in Miami. Think about this. If the Dolphins had gone all in on Tua, they would have given him an extension already, just like the Chargers did with Justin Herbert and the Bengals did with Joe Burrow. But Miami hasn't done that, and that tells you everything you need to know. They're waiting to see how this season plays out before making a final decision. And here's where things could get wild. If things go south, would the Dolphins consider trading Tua after the season? Based on how his contract is structured, a post-June 1st trade would save Miami $43 million in cap space. That's a massive number, and it would give them a ton of flexibility to reset the roster if needed. Now, before anyone freaks out, I'm not saying the Dolphins want to move on from Tua. In fact, I hope he goes out and proves he's the guy. But the way this team has handled his contract situation makes it clear that they aren't fully sold just yet. And that's something we have to keep an eye on. And then there's the draft. This is another area where we're going to learn a lot about the Dolphins' long-term plans. If they don't trade up, and instead trade down to acquire more picks for 2025, that would be a clear sign that they're hedging their bets. It would mean they're not just thinking about this season, but they're preparing for a potential reset next year. Go Dolphins!